I burned the invitation to my son's anniversary party, right there in the backyard, and booked a flight to New Orleans the next morning. The flames curled around the gold-embossed card, turning their fancy Bahamas getaway to ash. My hands didn't shake. Not anymore. For years. I'd been Maggie Thompson, the dependable grandma in a quiet Chicago suburb, the one who baked cookies, watched the kids, and kept the house running while James and Sarah lived their big shiny lives. But that invitation, left in my mailbox like an afterthought, with my name nowhere on it, that was the last straw. I stood there, watching the fire die, the smoke rising like all the words I'd never said. I wasn't invited. I was never invited. Just expected to stay behind, water the plants, lock the doors, and wait for their postcards. Wish you were here, they'd write, knowing full well they didn't mean it. The kitchen clock ticked louder than my voice ever did in this house. I'd raised James here, bandaged his knees, cheered at his games, cooked for his wedding. And Sarah, she'd smile, call me Mom, but her eyes always said convenience. I was the babysitter, the errand runner, the one they could count on to fade into the background. My heart was a locked drawer they never bothered to open. I poured tea, the steam curling like a question mark. Why did I keep saying yes? Why did I let them shrink me? The tea went cold. I didn't drink it. Instead, I opened my laptop, my fingers steady as I typed flights to New Orleans. One-way aisle seat, Margaret Thompson, no hesitation. I packed a small suitcase, comfy shoes, a navy dress I hadn't worn since my husband Tom's funeral, and a scarf I'd never dared to wear, too bright for someone like me, or so I'd thought. I called my neighbor, Linda, to water the plants. Going somewhere. Maggie, she asked, her voice curious but kind. Just a little trip, I said, and hung up before she could ask more. The next morning, I locked the door, left a note, gone to find myself. Plants are watered, and walked to the cab. The driver glanced at my suitcase, my gray hair, and gave that polite smile people reserve for old ladies traveling alone. Big adventure, he asked. Big enough, I replied, clutching my boarding pass like a shield. The airport was a blur of noise announcements, rolling suitcases, lives tangling in a hurry. I moved through it, not fast, but sure. I'd been invisible too long to care about blending in. Pretending you belong is half the battle, and I was done losing. On the plane, I took my aisle seat, watching families shove bags overhead, their voices loud with plans. The seat beside me stayed empty, a small gift from the universe. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let the engine's hum drown out the ache in my chest. I wasn't running away. I was running toward something, maybe myself. The plane lifted off, and Chicago shrank below me, a grid of streets I'd walked for decades, always someone's mother, someone's grandma, never just Maggie. As we climbed, I felt it a spark, small but stubborn, like the first flame that ate their invitation. I was done waiting to be seen. New Orleans was waiting, and for the first time in years, so was I. The air in New Orleans hit me like a warm embrace, thick with the scent of beignets and river mud. I stepped off the plane, my suitcase rattling behind me, and felt the city's pulse, jazz notes spilling from open doorways, laughter weaving through the crowd. I wasn't in Chicago anymore, where every corner knew my name but not my heart. I checked into a guest house in the French Quarter, its walls painted the color of sunset, creaking with stories older than mine. My room overlooked a courtyard where ivy clung to iron gates, and for a moment I just stood there, breathing it in. This was mine, this choice, this place, this moment. I wandered the market that afternoon, my steps slow but curious. A vendor held up a red scarf, bright as a cardinal's wing, and said, "This one's got your name on it, ma'am." I laughed, surprised by the sound of it. When had I last laughed like that? I bought the scarf, tied it loosely around my neck, and caught my reflection in a shop window. Not Grandma Maggie, not the woman who folded laundry while others made plans. Just Maggie, sharp and alive. I tucked that feeling away. Fragile, but growing. Like a seed I hadn't known I'd planted. At a cafe on Bourbon Street, I met Eleanor Brooks. She sat at the next table, silver hair swept into a no-nonsense bun, sipping coffee with a book in her hand. She caught me staring at her earrings, big, bold hoops that didn't care about her age. "You're gawking," she said, her Boston accent crisp, not unkind. "Sorry," I mumbled, but she waved it off. "Don't be," means you're awake. We got talking. Eleanor, a retired librarian, widowed like me, traveled alone because, as she put it, I don't wait for invitations anymore. I make my own. Her words landed like a match in dry grass. I'd spent years waiting for James to call, for Sarah to include me, for someone to say, "Stay. You're needed." Eleanor didn't wait. She moved. That night, I pulled out a journal I'd bought on impulse at the airport. My hands hesitated. Then wrote, "Things I've kept silent about." The pen scratched the page. Each word a confession. I'm tired of being the one who stays behind to clean up. I hate how they call me dependable, like it's all I am. I miss Tom's laugh, but I miss mine more. I wrote until my wrist ached, the jazz outside my window weaving through the words. Each line felt like peeling back a layer, revealing someone I'd forgotten. Not just a mother, not just a grandmother. Maggie, a woman who could still choose. Eleanor and I walked the next morning, her pointing out details I'd have missed the way a street lamp leaned like it was tired. The graffiti that read, "Hope," in faded blue. She didn't take photos, didn't post online. She just looked, really looked. And I started to see through her eyes. The world wasn't just a backdrop for someone else's story. It was mine, too. At a jazz club that evening, the music sank into my bones, all brass and longing. I tapped my foot, not caring who noticed. Eleanor grinned. "You're waking up, Maggie." I nodded, the red scarf loose around my shoulders. Maybe I was. Maybe I'd been asleep too long, lulled by routine, by duty, by the weight of being needed but not seen. New Orleans didn't care about my age or my past. It just played on, loud and unapologetic. And I was starting to hum along. Back in Chicago, my absence hit them like a slammed door. James and Sarah came home from their weekend getaway, expecting me in the kitchen, tea ready, house tidy. Instead, they found my note gone to find myself. Plants are watered. My phone buzzed with their calls, voicemails piling up like unpaid bills. James's voice, tight with worry. "Mom, where are you?" "This isn't like you. Sarah's sharper Maggie. This is selfish." The kids are confused. I let the messages sit, unanswered, their words heavy but distant, like thunder from a storm I'd already left behind. I wasn't ready to explain myself. Not yet. I'd moved on to Savannah, Georgia, where moss dripped from oaks like secrets nobody bothered to keep. The city felt slow, deliberate, each cobblestone street a whisper of history. I walked alone at first, my red scarf catching the breeze, my journal tucked under my arm. I'd added to it, "I've been their anchor," but anchors don't get to sail. The words stung, true in a way I hadn't admitted before. I'd held their lives together, James's, Sarah's, the kids, while mine stayed docked, rusting in place. Savannah's quiet beauty made me feel seen, not as a grandmother, but as a woman with a pulse, with dreams that hadn't quite drowned. At a small art gallery, I stopped, drawn to a painting of a river at dusk, all shadows and soft light. It stirred something, a memory of sketching by the lake with Tom, back when I thought I could be an artist. I hadn't touched a pencil in decades, not since life became a checklist of other people's needs. On impulse, I bought a sketchbook and a set of pencils, my hands trembling as I paid. That afternoon, I sat in a park, sketching the curve of an oak's branches, the lines shaky but alive. Each stroke felt like a conversation with someone I'd lost myself. I wasn't good, not yet, but I was starting. And that was enough. My phone buzzed again. A text from Lily, my granddaughter, just 16, her words cutting through the noise. Mom says you're having a midlife crisis at 68. I think you're just done being invisible. I stared at the screen, my throat tight. Lily saw me, not the Maggie who baked her birthday cakes, but the one who burned invitations and ran. I typed back, "You're right, sweetheart. I'm done hiding. I didn't send it yet, just held the phone, letting her words settle." They were a lifeline. Proof I wasn't alone in this rebellion. James's next voicemail was angrier. "Mom, you can't just disappear. We need you. Need..." That word again. I'd been needed for so long it had hollowed me out. I sketched harder, the pencil digging into the page, lines turning sharp, jagged. Savannah's air smelled of salt and old wood, grounding me as I walked its squares, my sketchbook heavy in my bag. I passed a couple holding hands, their laughter soft, and wondered when I'd stopped expecting joy for myself. The thought wasn't sad, it was fuel. I wasn't running from them, I was running toward me. Eleanor called from New Orleans, her voice bright over the phone. "You still alive?" "Maggie." I laughed, the sound freer than before. "Barely. Heading your way." Soon she was planning her next stop, Quebec City, and wanted me along. "You're not done waking up," she said, and I could hear her grin. I looked at my sketch, the oak's branches reaching beyond the page. She was right. I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. I booked a flight to join her, my fingers steady, my heart loud. Chicago's calls could wait. I had a life to draw. Quebec City wrapped me in its cold, crisp air, the kind that bites your cheeks and wakes your soul. Cobblestone streets stretched before me, lined with buildings that looked like they'd seen centuries of secrets. I'd left Savannah's warmth behind, chasing something I couldn't yet name. Eleanor met me at a cafe, her silver hair tucked under a wool cap, her eyes sharp despite the chill. "You look different," she said, stirring her hot chocolate, steam curling between us. "Less folded." I smiled, my red scarf loose around my neck. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was unfolding, like a letter I'd forgotten to mail. We walked the city together, our boots crunching on snow-dusted paths. Eleanor pointed out small things, a cracked window pane catching the light, a street sign bent by time. She didn't talk to fill the silence. She talked to share it. Over dinner, she told me about her years as a caregiver, how she'd poured herself into her husband's final days, only to realize she'd lost her own spark. "I didn't know I could still want things," she said, her voice low, steady. "But here I am, wanting." Her words hit me hard. I'd spent so long being needed by James, by Sarah, by the kids that I'd forgotten how to want. I wanted to paint again. I wanted to laugh without checking who was watching. I wanted to be Maggie, not just Grandma. That night, in my small hotel room, I opened my sketchbook. The pencil felt like an old friend, familiar but distant. I drew the Chateau Frontenac, its towers bold against the winter sky. The lines weren't perfect, but they were mine. I added to my journal things I've kept silent about. I'm not old. I'm unopened. I don't want their pity, I want their respect. I'm tired of pretending I don't dream. Each word felt like a brick in a wall I was building, not to keep others out, but to hold myself up. The city's quiet hum church bells. Distant footsteps wove through my thoughts, grounding me. I wasn't sketching to impress anyone. I was sketching to remember who I was. My phone buzzed, pulling me back. A text from Lily Grandma. I showed your Savannah sketch to my art teacher. She said you've got a real eye. Where are you now? My chest warmed. Lily, with her messy ponytail and too much eyeliner, saw me, not the woman who packed her lunches, but the one daring to draw again. I typed back, Quebec City, sweetheart. It's cold but alive. Like me. I hit send, my heart lighter. Her words were a bridge, small but sturdy, connecting me to something real. Eleanor and I spent the next day wandering, our breath clouding in the air. We stopped at a bookstore, its shelves sagging with stories. She bought a French novel. I picked up a watercolor set. Cheap, but bright. You're serious about this painting thing, Eleanor said. Not a question. I nodded. It's like breathing again. She didn't push, just smiled, her hoops glinting under the shop's dim lights. We ended the day at a cafe, sharing hot chocolate under a canopy of fairy lights. The server, a young man with a shy grin, called us les artistes. I laughed, the sound startling me. When had I last felt this light, this free? James's latest voicemail waited on my phone, his voice softer now. Mom, we're worried. Just tell us you're okay. I didn't reply, not because I was angry, but because I was busy living. I painted that night, a watercolor of Quebec's skyline, blues and grays blending into something bold. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest, like me. I looked at Eleanor, reading across the room, and thought, this is what I want. Not their approval, not their invitations. Just this me, a brush, a city that doesn't care about my age. I was waking up, and I wasn't going back to sleep. The Chicago air felt heavy when I landed, like it carried the weight of all the years I'd spent unseen. I wasn't back for good just for Lily's school art exhibition, a promise I'd made in a text from Quebec. The gallery buzzed with proud parents, chattering teachers, and kids clutching their sketches like treasures. I wore my red scarf, tied bold in my hair, and my navy dress, the one that made me feel sharp. Not faded. Lily spotted me first, her eyes bright, and ran over, hugging me tight. You came, she whispered, like it was a secret we shared. I nodded, my throat tight. For her, I'd always show up. Then I saw them, James and Sarah, standing by Lily's display, their faces stiff with something between worry and anger. Sarah marched over, her voice low but cutting. Maggie, you can't just run off and leave us. The kids were scared. We were scared. Her words echoed in the crowded room, heads turning. James stood behind her, silent, his hands in his pockets. I took a breath, steady, deliberate. You left me first, I said, my voice calm but firm, like a river finding its course. Every trip, every plan, every anniversary you celebrated without me. You left me first. The room seemed to still, Lily's eyes wide, watching me. Sarah's mouth opened, then closed, her certainty crumbling. James stepped forward, his voice soft. Mom, we didn't mean. But I held up a hand. You didn't mean to make me invisible. But you did. I turned and walked out. Lily's proud smile the last thing I saw. Miami greeted me with heat and color. A city that didn't whisper, it shouted. Eleanor was waiting at our hotel, a pastel building near the beach, her silver hoops glinting under neon signs. Rough day, she asked, handing me a lemonade. I nodded, the confrontation still burning in my chest. Let's fix that, she said, her grin mischievous. She dragged me to a salsa dancing class in a studio pulsing with music, all rhythm and sweat. I hesitated, my knees stiff, my heart still raw. But the beat pulled me in, insistent, alive. I tied my red scarf in my hair, stepped onto the floor, and moved. Not graceful, not perfect, but fully. I spun, stumbled, laughed, my body remembering joy I'd buried under years of duty. Eleanor joined me, her steps bold, and we danced under flashing lights. Two women refusing to fade. The crowd cheered, strangers' faces blurring into smiles. And for the first time, I didn't care who was watching. I was dancing for me. The next day, I found a community wall in Wynwood, covered in murals that screamed life. I'd brought my paints, the ones from Quebec, and asked the organizer if I could add something. He nodded, curious. I painted a woman, her hair wild, her arms open to the sky, reds and blues spilling from her like fire. Passers-by stopped, watched, whispered. That's you, Eleanor said, standing beside me, her voice proud. I nodded, paint smudged on my hands. It was me, not Grandma Maggie, not the woman who stayed behind, but Maggie Thompson, bold and unapologetic. A small crowd gathered, phones out, recording, their murmurs a hum of awe. I didn't pose, didn't smile for them. I just painted, each stroke a declaration I am here. My phone buzzed as I finished. A message from Lily. I told Mom and Dad you meant it. They're shook. I'm proud of you. I smiled, my heart full. The confrontation in Chicago had cracked something open, not just in me, but in them. I wasn't their backup plan anymore. I was a woman painting her truth on a wall, dancing to a beat I chose, living a life I'd almost forgotten was mine. Miami's heat wrapped around me like a promise, and I knew this wasn't the end of my fight. It was the beginning of my freedom. Tulum's ocean stretched before me, waves crashing like promises kept, each one a reminder that I was here, alive, not waiting. The air smelled of salt and freedom, the kind that seeps into your bones and stays. I stood on the beach, my red scarf fluttering, my bare feet sinking into warm sand. Eleanor sat nearby, sketching ruins in her notebook, her silver hoops catching the sun. We'd come to this place of ancient stones and endless blue, chasing something bigger than ourselves. I wasn't running anymore, I was claiming. That morning, I opened my journal, the pages worn from travel. I wrote a new list, things I know now. Silence isn't strength, it's surrender. I'm not too old to dream. Love doesn't mean shrinking to fit someone else's story. Each word carved out space in me, space I hadn't known I'd lost. I thought of Chicago, of Sarah's sharp words at the gallery, James's silence, Lily's proud eyes. I'd spent years being their anchor, steady but unseen. Now I was my own harbor. I closed the journal, my hands steady, and looked at the sea. It didn't care about my age or my past. It just roared, unapologetic. And I wanted to roar too. Eleanor joined me at dusk, the sky burning orange and pink. She told me about her own rebellion, leaving a job that chained her to a desk, traveling alone despite her family's warnings. They said I'd get lost. She laughed, her voice dry. I did. And it was the best thing I ever did. Her story settled into me, a mirror of my own. I'd been lost, too, in a life of duty, of being needed but not known. Now, I was finding my way, not back to them, but to me. My phone buzzed. A voice message from James. His voice was softer, cracked. "Mom, we messed up. Just let us know you're okay." I didn't answer. Instead, I opened the voice memo app, the ocean's rhythm behind me. "James," I said, my voice clear, unshaken. "I'm not angry, but I'm changed. I spent my life waiting to be needed, to be seen. I was your background, your safety net, no more. I love you, but I'm living for me now. If you want me in your life." It's as Maggie. A whole person, not a role. I hit send, my heart pounding but sure. The waves cheered, loud and wild, as if they'd heard me. Lily texted later, "Grandma, that message, Dad listened to it 3 times. He didn't say anything, just sat there. I think he gets it." I smiled, picturing her, all fire and heart, rooting for me. I sent her a photo of my latest watercolor Tulum's ruins, sharp against the sea. "For you." I wrote. She replied with a heart, simple and true. That night, Eleanor and I sat on the beach. No words, just the sound of waves and gulls. I painted the sunset, colors bleeding into each other. Messy but honest. I wasn't here for perfection. I was here for truth. The guest house was quiet, its walls painted with faded murals of Mayan gods. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the fan spinning slow circles. I thought of all the years I'd said, "I'm fine," when I wasn't. The birthdays I planned but never enjoyed. The trips I funded but never took. I'd been their Maggie, their grandma, their fixer. Now, I was mine. The thought wasn't loud or angry, it was solid, like the sand under my feet. I closed my eyes, the ocean's hum in my ears, and felt something new. Peace. Not the kind that comes from pleasing others, but the kind you earn by choosing yourself. Tulum had given me that, and I wasn't letting it go. Chicago's gray sky greeted me like an old acquaintance. Familiar, but distant. I stepped off the plane, my red scarf tucked in my bag, my sketchbook heavy with new colors. I wasn't the Maggie who'd left, the one who burned invitations and ran. I was someone new, someone who chose herself. I'd come back for Lily, for a community event where she'd asked me to speak, not as Grandma, but as Maggie Thompson, the woman who'd painted her way through cities and found her voice. The auditorium was small, packed with neighbors, their faces curious. I stood at the podium, my hands steady, and spoke. "You're never too old to start over," I said. My voice clear, unshaken. I spent years waiting to be seen. Then I stopped waiting and lived. The room erupted, clapping, some nodding like they knew that ache. Lily beamed from the front row, her sketch pad open, drawing me as I spoke. I felt it then my story wasn't just mine. It was theirs, too. Back home, the house smelled of dust and memory. I touched the chipped ceramic bowl on the table, the photo of Tom by the fireplace, his smile still young. Everything was the same, but I wasn't. I made tea, the steam curling like a quiet promise, and sat by the open window. My phone buzzed. A text from James' mom. "Can we come over? Please." I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch, not to punish, but to feel the weight of my own space. When I typed yes, it was my choice, not their demand. They arrived an hour later. James, Sarah, Lily trailing behind. No one spoke at first. Sarah's eyes were red, her usual sharpness softened. James stood by the door, hands in his pockets, like he was afraid to step too far in. "We messed up," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "We didn't see you, Maggie." "Not really." James nodded, his face tired. "I'm sorry. Mom, I didn't know how much we hurt you." Their words weren't grand, but they were honest, raw. I didn't rush to fill the quiet. I let it sit, let them feel the space I'd carried for years. "You didn't lose me," I said finally. "You just stopped seeing me. I'm here now. But not as your backup plan. As me." Sarah wiped her eyes. James looked at the floor, then at me, like he was seeing me for the first time. Lily broke the tension, pulling out a drawing from her bag. It was me, painting the mural in Miami, my red scarf bright, my face alive. The caption read, "She became her own masterpiece." I showed it to my art teacher. She said, grinning. She said, "You're an inspiration." My throat tightened. I hugged her, her warmth a reminder of why I'd come back. Not for duty, but for connection. Real and chosen. I poured tea, the clink of cups loud in the quiet. We sat, not as we used to, but as something new, people learning to see each other. James asked about Tulum, his voice careful. I told him about the waves, the ruins, my paintings. Sarah listened, really listened, her hand still for once. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. As they left, Lily lingered, her sketchpad under her arm. "You're different, Grandma," she said. "Stronger." I smiled. "I'm just Maggie now." She nodded, like she understood. The door closed, and the house settled into a new kind of quiet, not heavy, but full, like a canvas waiting for color. I picked up my sketchbook, opened it to a blank page, and began to draw. Not for them, not for anyone, just for me. I sat on my porch, the Chicago evening soft around me, painting a canvas of New Orleans jazz clubs glowing under a twilight sky. My red scarf lay across the table, worn but bright, like a flag I'd carried through every city. I wasn't running away when I left. I was running toward myself. The brush moved, colors blending, each stroke a piece of the woman I'd become. Not Grandma Maggie, not the one who stayed behind, but Maggie Thompson, whole and unapologetic. My phone stayed quiet now, no buzzing demands, just the hum of crickets and my own steady breath. I'd found my place, not in their lives, but in mine. Lily's drawing sat by Tom's photo on the mantel, her caption etched in my heart. She became her own masterpiece. I thought of Eleanor, of Tulum's waves, of the mural in Miami, of the speech that made strangers clap. I'd stopped waiting for permission to live, and that changed everything. My journal lay open, its final page titled, "Things I Know Now." Speak your truth, even if your voice shakes. Paint, dance. Create your passions aren't lost, just buried. Set boundaries. Love doesn't mean giving up your soul. Inspire others by living your story, not theirs. These weren't just words. They were my map, drawn from every step I'd taken. Every city that taught me to see myself. I've learned this, you don't need to be young to start over. You just need to be brave. I was 68 gray-haired, a widow, a grandmother, but none of that defined me anymore. I defined me. I saw it in the way I painted, bold and unafraid. I felt it when I danced in Miami, my heart racing, my laughter free. I heard it in Lily's voice, proud and clear, calling me an inspiration. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and that was enough. The canvas dried under the porch light, New Orleans alive in its lines. I leaned back, the night air cool on my skin. James and Sarah were learning to see me, slowly, carefully. Lily already did. But this wasn't about them anymore. It was about the woman who burned an invitation and found her fire. The woman who painted, spoke, danced, and refused to fade. I closed my journal, my fingers tracing its worn cover. I didn't need to write anymore. I was living my truth, loud and clear. And if you're listening, know this: you're never too old, too quiet, too anything to claim your own story. Go paint it. Go live it.